Since our earliest ancestors looked with awe into the distant stars of a moonless night sky, a single question has been asked countless times by countless numbers of people, sharing the same experience throughout the ages. The question they've asked speaks directly to the very core of every challenge that will ever test us in life, no matter how big or how small. It's at the heart of every choice we'll ever face, and it forms the foundation for every decision we'll ever make. The question that's at the root of all questions, the one that's been asked countless times by countless humans during the estimated 200,000 years or so that we've been on this earth, is simply this: who are we? In what may be the greatest irony of our lives, following 5,000 years of recorded history and technological achievements that stagger the imagination, we still have not answered this most basic question of our existence with certainty. Our origin, why it matters. The way we answer the question of how we've come to be as we are penetrates to the essence of every moment of our lives. It forms the perceptual eyes, the filters through which we see other people, the world around us, and most importantly, the way we see ourselves. Recent discoveries confirm that when we approach life knowing that our bodies are designed to repair and rejuvenate and heal, that this shift in perspective creates the chemistry in our cells that does just that. It mirrors our belief. Our self-esteem, our self-worth, our sense of confidence, our well-being, and our safety each stem directly from the way we think of ourselves in the world, from who we say yes to when it comes to choosing a life partner and how long our relationships last once we create them, to what jobs we feel worthy of. The most important decisions we'll ever make in our life are based upon the way we answer this single, timeless question: who are we? Harold Urey, a 20th century Nobel Prize-winning chemist, said, and this is a quote, "All of us who study the origin of life find that the more we look into it, the more we feel that it is too complex to have evolved anywhere." End of quote. On Saturday, February 28, 1953, two men walked into the Eagle Pub in Cambridgeshire, England, and they announced a discovery that would forever change the world and the way we think of ourselves. At noon that day, Cambridge University scientists James Watson and Francis Crick announced to their colleagues who were having lunch at the pub, quote, "We have just discovered the secret of life," end of quote. Watson and Crick had just made their breakthrough discovery of the double helix pattern of the DNA molecule, nature's code for life. Well, DNA is held within each cell of our body in thread-like structures that are called chromosomes. As humans, we have 23 pairs of these chromosomes in our cells. Each chromosome, in turn, is made of smaller, more precise regions of the DNA that are called genes. It's the codes contained within the genes and the chromosomes that determine everything about the function of our bodies, from the regulation of hormones and our blood chemistry, and how fast and to what size our bones grow, the size of our brains, the kind of eyes we have, and how long we live, to automatic functions such as breathing and digestion, metabolism, body temperature, and so much more. So with the discovery of this magnitude, it would seem that the greatest mysteries of our existence would be solved. And many have been. However, it's because of the deeper insights that the DNA discoveries have made possible, everything the genetic code has revealed, that scientists now face a quandary when it comes to interpreting where the new information fits into the accepted human story. In 1987, a paradigm-shattering discovery was made in the Caucasus region of Russia, near the border between Europe and Asia. Buried deep in the earth, in a place called Mezhmaiskaya Cave, scientists discovered the remains of a Neanderthal infant, baby girl, that lived about 30,000 years ago. So for reference, the last ice age ended about 20,000 years ago, meaning that this baby was alive during the ice age. William Goodwin, PhD from the University of Glasgow in Scotland, commented on the exceptional discovery, saying, quote, "It is something of a mystery how this child's remains were so perfectly preserved, this landmark discovery was the turning point when it comes to answering the question of where we humans fit on the evolutionary family tree. Using forensic techniques, scientists were able to extract the mitochondrial DNA from one of the baby's ribs for analysis. And the reason that mitochondrial DNA is key when it comes to the question of human evolution is because we inherit it only from our mothers. It's the uniqueness of this form of DNA that set the stage for the bombshell revealed by the Neanderthal baby girl. Using the most advanced techniques with results that are accepted in the highest courts of law, Russian and Swedish scientists tested the Neanderthal infant's DNA to see how similar hers was to that of modern-day humans. In other words, the scientists wanted to know if the Neanderthal girl was actually one of our ancestors, as the evolutionary family tree leads us to believe. The results of the first studies were published in obscure scientific journals and reported, quote, "The Neanderthal mtDNA sequences were substantially different from human mtDNA," end of quote. And although this single statement sounds relatively benign, it's the equivalent of an earthquake with the epicenter right at the core of the human evolutionary tree. Researchers at the University of Glasgow Human Identification Center published the results of their own investigation, comparing Neanderthal DNA to that of modern humans. The results of their study were shared in a way that made sense to even the most non-scientific reader, and the meaning of what they found could not be dismissed. The conclusion of their report was shared in the peer-reviewed journal titled Nature, and directly stated that modern humans, quote, "were not, in fact, descended from Neanderthals," end of quote. So if we're not descendants of Neanderthals, then who were our ancestors? Who are we? Where do we fit on the tree of evolution, or do we even belong in Darwin's evolutionary family? When I was in school, back in the 1960s and early 1970s, learning about Neanderthals and other pre-human beings, such as Australopithecus, the famous Lucy, and Homo habilis, the famous handyman, we were taught that there was another member of the evolutionary family tree who was a close ancestor as well. In those days, the name used for these distant relatives was the name Cro-Magnon. Paleoanthropologists have replaced this term with another word that makes more sense, and the reason will be self-explanatory. The new name used to identify the former Cro-Magnons is anatomically modern humans, abbreviated simply as AMH. Scientists generally agree that AMHs first appear in the fossil record about 200,000 years ago, and they mark the beginning of the subspecies Homo sapiens sapien. So although anatomically modern humans appeared on Earth 200,000 years ago, the oldest DNA discovered from them so far is from a man who lived in Siberia about 45,000 years ago, an anatomically modern human. Further advances in genetic technology allowed for the comparison of anatomically modern human bodies to those of 4 newly discovered Neanderthal bodies. A team of European scientists compared the DNA from the 2 anatomically modern humans, one that was 23,000 years old and the other that was 25,000 years old, with the DNA from the remains of Neanderthals who were variously dated as living between 29 and 42,000 years ago. An article on the findings, published in National Geographic News, states, quote, "Our results add to the evidence collected previously in different fields, making the hypothesis of a, quote, Neanderthal heritage, unquote, very unlikely," and that is the end of the quote. So once again, the Neanderthals, often portrayed as primitive cavemen in movies and cartoons, were eliminated as possible ancestors for us, for modern humans. So now that we know who our ancestors were not, the focus of paleoanthropology is shifted to discovering who we are. The DNA studies have narrowed the broad field down to one particular candidate, and it's not the candidate supporters of Darwin's theory expected. Scientists now believe that the anatomically modern humans, the AMHs, are us, and we are they. Any differences between contemporary bodies and those of the anatomically modern humans of the past are so slight that they don't justify a separate grouping. In other words, although ancient humans didn't necessarily behave like we do, they looked like us, they functioned like us, and they appear to have had all of the wiring in their nervous system that we have today. So stated another way, we still look and function as they did over 2,000 centuries ago, despite our incredible technological achievements. So it's the fact that members of our species, the Homo sapiens, have not changed since the date when our earliest ancestors first appear in the fossil record that poses a problem for the traditional story of evolution. The set of all human DNA, the human genome, was the first DNA sequence of any vertebrate to be entirely mapped. The international effort that made this mapping possible was called the Human Genome Project, or HGP, and it was the result of the largest cooperative biology project in the history of humankind. Well, after the success of the Human Genome Project, the same techniques used to map human DNA were then applied to other living things. Well, the results were nothing short of mind-boggling. Genetic mapping revealed that there is only a 1.5% difference that separates us from chimpanzee. We share 60% of the same DNA with a fruit fly, 80% of the same DNA with a cow, and 90% of our DNA is the same as that of a common house cat. So the big question that comes with these kinds of revelations is simply this: if we have so much in common with other creatures genetically, then why are we so very different from them? The answer to this question goes back to an unexpected discovery made during the Human Genome Project. And the discovery is this: that a single gene can be activated in different ways and to do different things to different degrees. And what this tells us is that it's not so much about what or how many genes we have in common with the chimps or the cows or the flies. It's more about how those genes are activated, or more precisely, how they are expressed. The FOXP2 gene, for example, now understood to be directly linked to our ability to form complex speech and language. FOXP2 is shorthand for the word forkhead box protein P2, a protein that's involved in the human ability for language. Located on chromosome number 7, the FOXP2 protein is coded from a gene that has the same name, FOXP2, and is present in both humans and chimpanzees. And this fact tells us that there is something more than the gene itself that's involved here. There's something in the way the gene expresses itself that gives us the ability to consistently create the sounds of language and communication. Scientists knew from earlier research that humans and chimpanzees both possess this FOXP2 gene. They also knew that the human version of the gene changed or mutated at some point in the past, and that change happened really fast. It didn't happen slowly and gradually, as the theory of evolution would suggest. The mutation happened, quote, rapidly around the same time that language emerged in humans, end of quote. Well, this is a pivotal discovery because for the first time, the specific mutation in FOXP2 was scientifically linked to our capacity to create language. Additional studies took this research even further and determined when this particular change happened. According to Wolfgang Inard of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, the mutations in FOXP2 that make our complex language possible, quote, happened in the same time frame when modern humans evolved, end of quote. A BBC News World Edition report clarifies this relationship and it states that our capacity for language happened when, quote, the changes to 2 single letters of the DNA code arose in the last 200,000 years of human evolution, end of quote. So the speed and the precision of the mutations in FOXP2 occurring in just the right 2 places in the DNA code are further examples of the kind of change that simply does not fit into the theory of evolution. The best science of the modern world has now given us the answer. The question now is, are we willing to accept what this DNA is telling us? Because humans are classified as the most complex and advanced member of the primate family, it was reasonable for scientists to expect that we would have more chromosomes than our less complex relatives. This is where an unexpected twist to our DNA story begins. Our nearest primate relative, as we mentioned previously, the chimpanzees, they have more chromosomes than we do, with a total of 48 in their overall genome. Ironically, humans have only 46. In other words, it looks like we're missing 2 chromosomes when we're compared to chimps. Mystery of where those chromosomes went appears to have been solved, but in doing so, however, once again we find ourselves at the threshold of an even deeper mystery that holds even more startling implications. A closer look at our genetic map shows that what has been thought to be our missing DNA in the past isn't really missing at all. It's been with us all along, only it's been modified and rearranged in a way that wasn't obvious in the past. The second largest chromosome in the human body, forming 8% of the total DNA in our cells, human chromosome number 2, actually contains the smaller, missing chromosomes found in the chimp genome. In other words, at some point in the past, for reasons that remain controversial, 2 separate chimp chromosomes were combined into a single, larger chromosome that now is our chromosome number 2. While scientists acknowledge that the mutations definitely occurred in FOXP2 and that they happened within the time frame that correlates with the rise of the anatomically modern humans, they can't really tell us what caused that change to happen. New technology has revealed precisely what happened to create human chromosome number 2. So I'll share the discovery in 2 ways with you. First, in the scientist's own technical language, from the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, to reveal the details of the discovery itself. And then I'll describe it again with a simpler description in lay language to illustrate why this discovery is so important and what it means in our discussion. And this is a quote from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. We conclude that the locus cloned in cosmids C8.1 and C29b is the relic of an ancient telomere-to-telomere fusion and marks the point at which 2 ancestral ape chromosomes fused to give rise to chromosome number 2. I know that's a technical description, and I wanted you to hear it in the researcher's own words. The simplified explanation: it appears that long ago, 2 separate chromosomes from chimpanzees, and these were chromosomes 2A and 2B, were merged or fused into the single larger chromosome that is now our human chromosome 2. It's the key that gives us our humanness. Many of the characteristics that make us uniquely human come from this fusion. I want to be absolutely clear that what I say next is not the conclusion of peer-reviewed science, although I've spoken with mainstream scientists who have told me that they suspect what I'll share is true, yet they are reluctant to speak publicly about their suspicions in fear of losing their reputation, their credibility, or even their jobs. When I honestly consider the evidence that I've shared, it simply makes sense to look beyond evolution and an unbelievably good run of biological luck to explain the fact that we exist as we do. The evidence overwhelmingly suggests that, number 1, we are the result of an intentional act of some kind. Point: the mutations in FOXP2 and human chromosome 2 are precise. Point: The mutations in FOXP2 and human chromosome 2 appear to have happened quickly. Point: the optimization of human chromosome 2 that occurred after the fusion happened appears to be intentional. Point: the fact that after 150 years of searching, no physical evidence has been discovered that links us to other forms of life on the tree of primate evolution suggests that we may be a species unto ourselves with no evolutionary history. Number 2, we are the product of an intelligent form of life. Point: the timing, the precision, the accuracy of our genetic mutations, and the technology required to yield such mutations implies forethought and intention of an advanced intelligence. Point: the intelligence that carried out genetic modifications, giving us our humanness, had the advanced technology to do so 200,000 years ago in a way that we are only learning to do today. For example, DNA fusion and gene splicing. To honestly acknowledge these possibilities opens us to a paradigm that shifts the way we feel about ourselves and the way we view our place in the universe. And with this shift, we free ourselves from a lonely paradigm of insignificance to one of a rare and unique heritage that we're only beginning to explore. We're here with the bodies and the nervous systems that afford us the extraordinary abilities of compassion, empathy, sympathy, intuition, self-healing, and much more. The fact of their presence within us suggests that we're intended to utilize and master these sensitivities that we've arrived with. From the time of our origin, we have been wired for these extraordinary abilities. This design affords us extraordinary ways of living and extraordinary lives. The question that immediately comes to mind when we consider that we've had such advanced characteristics from the time of our beginning is simply this: how do we fully awaken these capabilities in our lives today? What do they mean to us? I invite you to share a journey of discovery in which we will do our very best to answer not only this question, but to explore the deepest truths of our new human story.
Welcome to Quantum Minds TV, where we take a deep dive into various perspectives on what it's going to take to create a shift in human consciousness. Now, today, I'm very honored to have Gregg Braden joining me. Gregg is a 5-time New York Times bestselling author, scientist, and a pioneer in the emerging paradigm-bridging science, social policy, and human potential. His research resulted in the 2003 discovery of intelligent information encoded into the human genome and the 2010 application of fractal time to predict future occurrences of past events. Gregg's work has led to 15 film credits, 12 award-winning books, now published in over 40 languages, and he was the 2020 nominee for the prestigious Templeton Prize, established to honor outstanding individuals who have devoted their talents to expanding our vision of human purpose and ultimate reality. He has presented his discoveries in over 34 different countries on 6 continents and has been invited to speak to the United Nations, Fortune 500 companies, and the U.S. military. So, Gregg, thank you so much for being my distinguished guest today on Quantum Minds TV. It is a huge honor to have you here.
Oh, Teresa, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. I'm excited. I'm really excited to be here. This is completely unscripted. I have no idea where this is going to go. And I was thinking about this as I was dialing in. This is like a dance, and you're leading the dance, and I'm honored to follow this dance. And my sense is our time is going to go by very quickly today. So here we go.
Here we go. Well, thank you for trusting me to I guess, lead the dance this time. When I first became aware of your work, it was in around 2000, and I had read your book, Awakening the Zero Point, and it was really an eye-opener for me. And then after that, I actually attended one of your weekend workshops, a 3-day workshop in Seattle, and I was immediately impressed by a couple of things. You really gained my respect as a scientist, and you gained my admiration as a person, because as a scientist, I really appreciated how much you really did your research, and then how you also really cited your sources that people like me could follow up on that paper trail and go and do our own research and make our own minds about the interpretation of things. But more than that, what stood out to me was just how genuine of a person you are. And every time I've interacted with you, Gregg, you really are so genuine and you clearly embody everything that you teach. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. And I want to dive into all kinds of stuff on human potential and DNA today.
Well, thank you for that. What you don't know is it's been a tough couple of weeks. It's really good for me to hear that today. So it means probably more than you know. And if you saw me in Seattle, that was a while ago. I think my hair was probably a little longer and darker back then. So thank you. Thank you for that. And I have followed your work as well. So this is the Mutual Admiration Society here. And I love the way that you are bridging so many of the ancient and the mystical traditions with the best science of the modern world, two very different languages, but they're both telling us pretty much the same thing, in the sense that we are not what we have been told, number one, and we are more perhaps than we've ever even allowed ourselves to imagine. And I think that's a powerful and a very timely message for our global family and the world that we find ourselves, the world that's at our doorstep today. So yeah. So thank you for that, Teresa.
Yeah, well, you've definitely been one of my role models, and you've really been a pioneer in this field of bridging science and ancient indigenous wisdom, ancient mystical teachings, evidence from ancient civilizations and so forth, and what that tells us all about our human potential, which is a subject near and dear to my heart. So this conversation that you've been having around having a new human story, and it's a shift in paradigm, and that is very much about what this is all about. Quantum Minds TV is about what is it going to take to create that shift in human consciousness. And one of the areas that you really have discovered some pretty fascinating research and revelations around is the mysteries of the DNA, and how that reveals that we have far more potential inside of us than what we have realized or even been manifesting. And there are ways that we can start to unlock that. So this is something that I want to dive into. And I think in your Awakening 0 Point book, even, which is way back, you talked about these superhuman abilities. You talked about regeneration, self-healing, super immunity, and so many gifts that are there to be unlocked within our DNA. So what would you say are some of the keys to awakening this?
Well, this is a big topic.
Yes.
And so first of all, the book Awakening 0 Point was written in 1986. And we certainly know more now than we knew in 1986. And so there are places in the book where the information needs to be updated. It was based on what was known in 86. And I'm a scientist by degree. I'm a degreed earth scientist, geophysicist, and geologist with a strong multidisciplinary background in the life sciences. So marine biology, as well as math, physics, computer science, and astronomy and archaeology. And I say that because it's that diverse background that has allowed me to stay current with the new discoveries that are seriously coming out on a weekly basis. There's a peer-reviewed scientific journal. It's called Science, and it comes out every month. But there are so many discoveries that are happening. They now supplement, they have been for years now, they supplement that with a weekly newsletter describing the discoveries that have been made in the past week. So all of this has led me to stay current with the discoveries. And I think one of the biggest shifts in thinking for me, Teresa, was the realization that we literally are a highly advanced, technologically sophisticated, soft technology. And that's I'm saying this now because we're going to tie into this throughout this conversation. Yeah. Literally a soft technology. And rather than computer chips and artificial intelligence and sensors, the way we typically think of technology, we are cell membranes and neurons and ion potentials moving across cell walls. But we have the unique ability to self-regulate, to upgrade on demand, to up-regulate genes on demand. And the key access points to our technology are held in the most ancient and cherished indigenous and spiritual traditions. And it's all about thought, feeling, emotion, breath, and focus, and different combinations of those and how they're used. So when I began to understand that we are a technology, literally a technology, and this was, I mean, it's no accident. The timing is no accident. When I was working in the industry in the 1960s, 1970s, early 1980s, computers were just coming into vogue. At that time in the 50s and 60s, they took up a whole room. And, they weren't the microcircuits that we see today in the laptops. And when I began to understand that we are this technology and that we are programmable and upgradable just the way that software was that I was learning at the time, my question was, how far do these parallels extend? How programmable are we? And to what degree can we upgrade or upregulate our own technology? And this led me to look at DNA in a way that was very different than we were thinking of it back in those days. I mean, a lot of people just thought that cells were little sacks of water, with some, I mean, some cool stuff floating, including DNA, was just floating around inside the cell nucleus. And now we know, of course, that's not true. And I'm going to say this now, we'll tie into this as well, that the DNA actually is encapsulated in a protein that is called chromatin. And it is the way that the chromatin encapsulates the DNA that determines the quality of how the DNA can express itself in our bodies. So when that chromatin is locked down tight, I mean, you can just kind of visualize this. When it's locked down tight, the DNA is still there, it's still functioning, but it cannot function as efficiently. It cannot express as completely. And when it is looser, and the ability of the DNA to express is called spooling, spooling. So the way the DNA is spooling, or if genes are actually silenced, we have the ability to silence specific genes, is largely related to whether or not this chromatin is wrapped tightly or loosely. And this is the bridge. This is where it gets really interesting, because the chromatin responds to thought, feeling, emotion, breath, and focus.
I've seen some of the research, that shows that when we're, as you're saying, feeling and thinking and expressing more positive emotions, compassion, gratitude, things like that, love, everything within us relaxes. And as does that coiling or that spooling of the DNA. And yet when we are stressed, when we're negative, angry, then everything stresses up, it tenses, it tightens. And so it's almost like as it's wrapping around the histone, then into the chromatin, it's changing the conformation or the structure of the DNA and how much of it's even accessible to be expressed, or which genes can be accessed to build the amino acids and the proteins and so forth. And so I know that HeartMath had done some of this research, but are there other, and there's some epigenetics, of course, some of the work of Bruce Lipton and so forth. So what research have you seen that is indicating these keys of being able to access more of it?
Well, you just covered a lot of ground. So there is an emerging science. Bruce Lipton, our dear friend, spiritual brother, was actually doing the research back in the 1960s that became what we now today called epigenetics. He was taking cells, putting them in a petri dish. Same cells, different environments became expressed differently. They became muscle cell or bone cell or heart tissue or whatever it was. All that changed was the environment. The cell was exactly the same. So that was the foundation for what we now know is epigenetics. Epi is above, so it's above control, above the genetics. What you don't often hear about is we have what is called an epigenome. So most people are familiar with the genome, but the epigenome are the factors, the access points to the DNA. Some of these are very familiar and some are not. I mean, things like certainly diet, exercise, nutrition, supplements, the external environment, temperature, toxins in the environment, those all influence the ability for the DNA to express. But one of the greatest epigenetic access points is the internal environment. And I'm just going to keep coming back to this. We self-regulate. Sometimes we're aware of it, sometimes we're not. But we self-regulate through thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, the way we think about ourselves, the way we feel about our relationship to the world, breath, and focus. So what this means is we live in a world that's changing faster than we've been conditioned to accept that change. And we've also been conditioned to hinge our sense of well-being, Teresa, on the world around us. And most people don't think about that. We don't wake up in the morning and talk about it at the breakfast table, but if the world, if there's relative peace in the world, stock market looks good, retirement, IRA, 401k, kids' education, everybody's healthy, and there's food in the fridge, we're feeling like it's a pretty good day. But when those things start to change, they create this tension in our body. So the unresolved stress, and we know it leads to inflammation. Well, that is the information that we're feeding into the genome and the epigenome. And it makes a lot of sense. When we live in fear, these are all aspects of fear. We're tightening that chromatin, and the DNA isn't able to express as fully. And we see that our immune system, for example, takes a hit. And we all know this. When we live in stress, the immune system takes a hit. So a couple of different things going on here. You mentioned the Institute of HeartMath, a pioneering research organization in Northern California. They're dear friends, colleagues. I've worked with them since their inception. I'm not their employee, but they've allowed me to share their content as an independent author and also give me access to the research. So the research that they did was with DNA outside of the body. So it was not in the chromatin when they were researching it. But what they did was they took what's called pristine DNA, and this was from the umbilical cords of newborns. So it had not been damaged through a lifetime of environmental stress, ultraviolet lights, chemicals, toxins, all that pristine DNA. And they isolated it in a device that allowed them to measure, and you mentioned this word, it's called the conformation. It's the shape of the DNA. And in the presence of different emotions, here's where it gets interesting. The emotions were generated from another individual, so the DNA wasn't even inside the body. So the emotions of the heart were creating a field or influencing a field that was actually influencing the DNA. And the bottom line, just to make it really easy, what they found was what we would consider negative emotions. So anger, fear, hate, jealousy, rage, tightened that DNA, just like a little knot, and changed that conformation, tightened it up, and it was not able to express fully. And just the opposite was true. Compassion, appreciation, gratitude, all relax the DNA. Now, one of the interesting things, you say, where's the word love? And love means different things to different people. And the word love does not seem to have the same impact. However, love is the umbrella, the general umbrella that encompasses appreciation, gratitude. These are expressions of love, compassion, care. So ultimately, love is, without using the word love, is what allowed the greatest expression of the DNA outside the body. Now, this is a mind blower because this is the.
Can I just ask a question on that for some clarification? Sure. So you're saying that the DNA outside the body was then being influenced by a person who was experimenting with those certain emotions. Would that mean then that not only are we able with our own emotional state to program our DNA, we can also influence another person's DNA conformation if they're within our field based on our emotional state?
So the word, you use the key word, we can influence. We don't control, we don't manipulate, but we definitely have an impact. And we all know this. You walk into a room with people that you love and care about, and you have a conversation, or you have dinner with friends that you have just a really good connection with, and you leave and you're buzzed. You feel good for hours afterwards. You're not sleepy. Your immune system is stronger. They've measured it, to determine this. So yes, we are in constant communication with the world around us as well as the world within us to different degrees. So the HeartMath experiments were the first that were, and this was Roland McCready and Glenn Ryan were the two scientists at this time, and this was done back in the early 90s, 92, 95, right around in there, published in peer-reviewed journals. So this is real stuff that we're talking about. The idea that a non-physical force, such as human emotion, generated through the heart field, could influence physically the DNA in the human body. That was a novel concept. That was in colloquial terms, that was the mind blower.
Yeah.
They said,
wow.
because now there's another part of this experiment, this series of experiments, and that was that this pristine DNA was isolated and placed into a vacuum tube. And the word vacuum implies that nothing is in there. No air is in there, but we know that photons still exist within that vacuum. Mm-hmm. And the reason this is important is because photons are the fundamental building blocks of the atom, of physical matter. So what they were doing is it was an experiment to see if the non-physical stuff that our world is made of, light, photons, could be influenced by the physical stuff that we are made of, DNA. And what they found, they measured the photons in the vacuum by itself, and it was completely random. Photons were all over the place, just what they expected, no surprise there. And when they introduced the DNA into the vacuum, those photons went from being random to becoming ordered, and they aligned themselves along the axis of the DNA strand. So what we're seeing is the scientific evidence of what our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions have always said without the science, is that we are part of the world around us, and we have the ability to influence, not control, not impose our will, not manipulate, but we can influence the physical world through non-physical means. So now you put this all together, human emotion is changing the shape of the DNA, and that shape determines the quality of the expression of that DNA in the world, and that DNA influences the photons that are the foundation of the stuff this world is made of. Mm. And you take that middle piece out, and what you're saying is emotion is influencing our physical world. And
well, even more than that, potentially. Now, are you referring to the phantom DNA effect from Dr. Peter Garya? Yeah, so even more than just influencing the photons, that when they took the DNA out, and then they took the light through it again, they saw that the light still was structured and ordered, which means that the DNA is informing the quantum vacuum. And there's a communication or something happening there that is structuring that vacuum, that is our DNA is like a portal to be able to connect at a quantum level.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's even more than that. I had, for the universal theme in all the indigenous traditions, that I have not visited every indigenous community. Every indigenous community I have visited, they share a common belief that everything is connected, and that we are part of that connection. For a long time, early in my life, I went to school back in 1950s, 60s, and early 70s is when I was in school. And scientists were pushing back on that. Even Einstein's ideas. He didn't like, this is where he struggled toward the end of his life, to unify the forces of nature, the electromagnetic force, gravity, strong and weak nuclear force, to find an eloquent story, an equation that would tie those together, because he was omitting this fundamental force that ties everything together. And I had the privilege of being at the CERN superconducting supercollider in 2017, and there's a lot of controversy around CERN, and we can talk about, a lot of it is unfounded. I will say that a lot of it is unfounded. But in the experiments that were being conducted there, they were recreating the beginning of the universe in the way that they believe the universe began. Some of those ideas are changing now. But the bottom line is, from the first few fractions of a second after our universe began, there is a field of energy, and it was confirmed in CERN in 2012. They announced it on July 4th, 2012, Independence Day in the United States, which is very interesting. Maybe it's a coincidence, I don't know. But the point is that the scientific community is now on board with the fact that to some degree there's a field that's there. Now, I know you've talked with our dear friend and colleague Nassim,
Yeah.
and we've had lengthy conversations, and we both believe that what was found at CERN is an expression of a deeper field. But the point is, the scientists are on board with the fact there's a field. But here's where it gets interesting, Teresa. I've gone to the conferences now, and they still do this. These esteemed scientists will stand on the podium, and they'll say, there's a field out there, and their hands do this. I'm out of the frame. There's a field out there that connects all things. They're still separating us from the field. And the reality is that every atom, the average human has about 50 trillion cells in the body. Each of those cells has about 100 trillion atoms. Every one of those atoms is constantly emerging from this field and collapsing back into the field in this eloquent dance. We are the field. And so when we shift our perception, when we shift our thought, feeling, emotion, belief, breath, and focus, it's not like we're trying to influence something over there. We are actually influencing, we are wrinkles in the field. We are disturbances in this field held in place by the consciousness that gives us life. And when that consciousness leaves, we become homogeneous with that field once again. We go back into the fundamental elements. So it's a very different way of thinking, but this is what we're seeing now. It makes sense that we would influence and have influence over the stuff that's happening in that field.
And if I may, so I actually visited CERN in 1998.
Wow.
As a recruiting trip for one of the universities I had applied to for graduate school. And, so I went to go and get a tour of the whole CERN and, the big particle smashing, so it's high energy physics, which was one of the things I was thinking of researching in graduate school. And, what was interesting to me, though, with CERN and some of these other big accelerator experiments is that, they ramp up the energy, and then they smash the particles together at higher and higher energies. And then they watch what comes out of the quantum field, the quantum vacuum, basically. And as they would ramp the energy up more, they would get more particles coming out that they didn't know of before. And, ultimately they're thinking, well, if we can ramp it up high enough, then we would get to the Higgs boson, the God particle that was the one that all of them came from and that created mass and all of this. And but my even in graduate school, for me, it was like, well, it's actually not about the particles. It's more about the energy and what, the field itself that they're trying to tap into. But they're so focused on the particles and on, the physical side of things that there's a paradigm shift that needs to happen even within science for them to understand that the field's not just out there, it is also in here within every atom, every cell of our body, and that we are intimately connected with. And scientists today still, I think, are very much operating on a Newtonian mindset, even though they're steeped in quantum physics. The mindset of how they perceive reality is very Newtonian in that it's deterministic, reductionistic, materialistic, and based on separation. And separation is that key thing where they think that they themselves are separate from their experiments. This sort of closed system idea of how can we can control nature and be separate from it, and my emotions and my thoughts don't influence. But in ancient, the predecessor to science, which was alchemy, the alchemists said, no, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our inner state is intimately connected with whatever we're experimenting on. And I cannot take something outside of me through that transformational process without also transforming myself. And, so they actually, the alchemists, the early scientists, used their physical experiments as a reflection for their own inner transformational process. And so here we are coming back around to what we could call a new paradigm, but it's actually an ancient paradigm of all this connectivity, and that we are the universe. We are connected to it all.
Yeah, well, we are, and what you've described is a fundamental difference in the world of physics. Einstein, as brilliant as he was in some respects, was very attached to the idea of separation. And he said, very famously, he said, we live in a world independent. We are independent of the world around us, and that we're lucky if we understand a little bit of it. Mm-hmm. At the same time, he had a colleague. They're both Princeton University, same conferences. They had the same math, the same equations, very different conclusions, John Wheeler. Mm-hmm. And John Wheeler, and he lived much longer. He died in the mid-80s. Einstein, I think, died in 53. So we were blessed to have Wheeler for many more years, pioneering this idea. And what Wheeler said very clearly was that the universe is incomplete because we are building the universe. He said, the act of observing the world is what he called us living in a participatory universe. Mm-hmm. And so the outcome, and this ties right back into what you were saying about CERN, the implications of what Wheeler said were just so profound, because what he was saying is, here we are as astronomers, we're looking for the edge of the universe. And we're looking, as physicists, we're looking for the smallest particles. So we build bigger and bigger devices to look for the small particles, and we build stronger radio telescopes to look at the edge of the universe. And every once in a while, you'll see an article that says, aha, we found the edge of the universe, or we found the smallest particle. Then they build a new machine that looks deeper, and they say, oh, well, it wasn't the smallest particle, it wasn't the edge. And what Wheeler said, the implication, Teresa, from my understanding of what he said, is that we will probably never find the smallest particle, and we will probably never find the edge of the universe. And the reason for that is where we find our power. The reason is the act of us observing with the expectation that something will be there is an act of creation that will put something there for us to see. And that tells the whole story of our relationship to our bodies and to the world around us, to our most intimate relationships, to our abundance. It is, and it's this shift, this little shift. We are so conditioned to think of ourselves as separate from the world and separate from this field. We are the field. So if we want something, if we want a healing in our bodies, or we want abundance in the world, you've got to give the field something to work with so the field can reflect it back. And we're conditioned to focus on what we don't have, on the illness or the disease or the lack or the hurt. And so the field keeps mirroring that right back, and we think that something is broken. And the work that you're doing so beautifully illustrates what we're saying here through alchemy. You give that field something to work with, but give it what it is that you're dreaming, that you're imagining, in your heart of hearts.
This conscious conversation was created, produced, and recorded by Dr. Teresa Bullard-Wyke in collaboration with Gregg Braden, and edited by Verse Content and HH Films and Photo. The theme music was created by Tim Mountain of Even Load Productions. Quantum Minds TV is a product of the Quantum Learning Academy.